The call to arms. The year was 2156, and Earth had just received a transmission from an unknown source, a warning. The voice on the other end was cold, mechanical, as if it were a message meant to terrify. "You are outnumbered, outgunned, and your planet will be ours," the voice said, sending a chill through the hearts of every person who heard it. The Zoreth, an alien race, were coming. Hundreds of ships, all armed with technology far beyond anything humanity had ever seen, were on their way to Earth. Panic spread like wildfire. News outlets across the globe broadcasted the chilling message. Governments, military leaders, and civilians alike were caught off guard by the sudden threat. Earth had faced attacks before, but never on this scale. The Zoreth were not just another alien race. They were conquerors, and they were coming for Earth. In every major city, people huddled in fear, unsure of what would come next. The leaders of Earth's various nations gathered in secret meetings, discussing how to respond. There was no time to waste. The Zoreth fleet was on a collision course with Earth, and humanity's survival was at stake. The United Nations held an emergency summit, with military generals, scientists, and strategists all in attendance. They debated the best course of action, but one thing was clear: Earth was outmatched. The Zoreth had an armada of ships, each larger and more powerful than any human-made vessel. Earth had only a few defenses, fleets of warships that were barely a match for the coming onslaught. The fate of the planet hung in the balance. Amidst the chaos, a proposal was made, a decision that would shake the very foundation of humanity's defense strategy. "What if we send only one ship?" General Armitage, a seasoned military leader, suggested. The room went silent. Only one ship. The idea seemed ludicrous. How could sending a single ship possibly help them against an entire alien fleet? "We must use our best vessel. One ship, yes, but one capable of more than any of their ships. The element of surprise is our best weapon," General Armitage continued. He explained that Earth's scientists had been working on a secret project for years, an experimental warship known as the Vanguard. It was faster, more maneuverable, and heavily armed, designed for a purpose only a few knew about. But could it truly stand against the Zoreth? The room was divided. Some felt the idea was insane, that Earth needed a full fleet to fight off the alien invaders. Others, however, saw the logic in Armitage's plan. By sending only one ship, humanity could strike when the enemy least expected it. But the risk was enormous. If the Vanguard failed, Earth would have no backup. There would be no second chance. As the discussions raged on, a decision was finally made. The Vanguard would be sent to face the Zoreth alone. The crew was chosen, and Captain Riker was given command. He was a man of few words, known for his tactical brilliance, and this mission was his greatest test. The fate of Earth rested on his shoulders. Captain Riker sat in his quarters, staring at the list of names of those who would accompany him on this mission. His crew was a mix of experienced officers and young recruits, all eager but unsure of what lay ahead. Riker knew the odds were slim, but he also knew that he had to lead them. This was not just about victory. This was about survival. The Vanguard was humanity's last hope, and Riker couldn't afford to fail. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the leaders of the United Nations made their final preparations. They communicated with other nations, assuring them that the rest of the planet would be defended by every available ship and soldier. The Vanguard would be the spearhead, and it had to succeed. Riker's mission would set the tone for humanity's future, for better or worse. As the countdown to launch began, Riker walked the corridors of the Vanguard. The ship was sleek, its advanced weaponry and defenses hidden beneath a glossy exterior. The crew was ready, or at least they appeared to be. Riker had spent days preparing them, explaining the gravity of the mission. They were going to fight the Zoreth alone, but they had one advantage: the element of surprise. "Ready to go, Captain," Lieutenant Carter called out, his voice steady despite the fear that everyone could feel. Riker nodded, giving him a brief smile. "It's time," he said. The ship's engines roared to life as it ascended into the sky, leaving Earth's atmosphere behind. The stars stretched out before them, endless and silent. The Vanguard was now officially on its way to meet the enemy. As the ship traveled through the vastness of space, Riker reflected on the situation. He couldn't help but wonder if they had made the right choice. One ship, facing a fleet of hundreds. The thought seemed absurd, yet here they were. His hand rested on the command console, and he glanced at the readouts. The Zoreth fleet was on a direct course toward Earth, but there was something strange about their approach. It was too calm, too confident, almost as if they knew something humanity didn't. Riker couldn't shake the feeling that the Zoreth were underestimating them. They thought one ship wouldn't be enough. But Earth had always been underestimated, hadn't it? Maybe that was their greatest strength. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden beep from the communications console. It was a transmission from Earth. "Captain, we've received another message from the Zoreth. They are issuing a final warning. Surrender or face annihilation." Riker's grip tightened on the console. He was ready for whatever came next. The Vanguard was about to face the greatest challenge humanity had ever known. The countdown had begun. As the Vanguard sailed through the dark, silent void of space, Captain Riker's mind raced. The Zoreth fleet loomed large in their path, its enormous ships just visible on the distant scanners. They had hours left before the battle would begin, but every minute felt like an eternity. The crew members of the Vanguard were on edge, whispering among themselves as they prepared for the coming storm. They had trained for missions like this, but nothing could have truly prepared them for what lay ahead. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before them, and the Zoreth fleet was drawing closer by the minute. Every second brought them closer to a fight they didn't know they could win. Riker paced the bridge, his mind constantly moving from one possibility to the next. He had a job to do, to lead the crew and ensure the survival of their mission. But even with the advanced technology of the Vanguard, a ship as old as it was, he couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The Zoreth were powerful. They were relentless. And now, they were about to discover humanity's only defense. A single ship against their entire fleet. "How are we looking, Lieutenant?" Riker asked, his voice steady but carrying an edge of tension. Lieutenant Carter, the ship's communications officer, glanced at the readouts and then met Riker's eyes. "The Zoreth fleet is still moving towards us. They're not slowing down. They haven't tried to make contact again, but we've picked up some strange activity. Their ships seem to be operating on a schedule, almost like they're anticipating our move." Anticipating. Riker frowned. That wasn't good. The Zoreth were a mysterious race, known for their cold logic and ruthlessness. If they were anticipating a single ship's arrival, they might have prepared for just this moment. "Keep an eye on them. Let me know if anything changes." "Understood, Captain," Carter replied, turning back to his console. Riker moved to the front of the bridge, gazing out at the stars. The sheer vastness of space was overwhelming, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to think about the enormity of the task ahead. Earth had placed its trust in him and his crew, sending only one ship to face the threat of annihilation. The decision seemed impossible to justify, and yet it had been made. His mind wandered back to the high-level discussions on Earth. As much as they tried to make it sound like a brilliant strategy, the truth was far murkier. Why had they chosen to send only one ship? Was it really a tactical decision, or was there something more? Riker had his suspicions, but there was no time for speculation now. As the hours passed, the Vanguard grew closer to the Zoreth fleet. Riker called for a crew briefing. Everyone gathered in the central command room, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "We don't have much time before we make contact with the enemy," Riker began, his voice calm yet firm. "But I want to make something clear. We are not just going into battle to survive. We're going in to win. The Zoreth may be bigger and stronger, but we have something they don't: We have the element of surprise, and we have each other. I trust each and every one of you to do your job." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. The crew members exchanged nervous glances, but they didn't speak out of turn. They were ready, or at least they had no choice but to be. "Captain," Lieutenant Carter spoke up, his voice tense. "The Zorath are sending another transmission. They've issued their final warning. They say humanity has no chance of survival. If we don't surrender, they'll destroy us." Riker glanced at the screen, where the Zorath's message flickered in front of him. The alien face, cold and expressionless, stared back at them. "Surrender is not an option," the alien said. "You will be destroyed, human. Your ship is insignificant. Your people will kneel before us." Riker clenched his fists. There was no way he was going to let Earth fall to these invaders. He looked back at his crew. "We fight for Earth, for our families, for our future. We don't surrender. We stand and fight." As the final words left his mouth, the crew nodded in unison, their resolve strengthening. They had made the decision to fight, and they would follow Riker into whatever came next. Hours passed as the Vanguard continued to close the distance between them and the Zorath fleet. The tension was unbearable. Riker knew that once the Vanguard entered the range of their weapons, there would be no turning back. They would be in the fight of their lives. It was then that Riker called his second-in-command, Lieutenant Vega, to his side. She was one of the most experienced officers aboard, and her expertise in ship navigation was second to none. "Vega," Riker said quietly, "I need you to keep the Vanguard moving at full speed. We can't let them get a clear shot at us. If we can stay out of their targeting range for long enough, we might be able to use our advanced weapons to strike them first." "I understand, Captain," Vega replied, her face serious. "I'll do everything I can to keep us in the fight." As the ship raced toward the Zorath fleet, Riker's thoughts turned once again to the real reason Earth had chosen to send only one ship. What were they hiding? Why had they kept the Vanguard secret all these years? There had to be more to this mission than anyone had been told, but there was no time to dig deeper. He would have to trust that the mission would unfold as it needed to. The time to act was almost upon them. Suddenly, the communication panel beeped again. Carter looked up, his face pale. "Captain, the Zorath fleet is now in range. They're locking onto us. We're about to enter their firing range." Riker's heart raced as he stood up. "Brace yourselves, everyone. It's time." The crew scrambled to their stations, their faces set with determination. The Vanguard was about to face its first true test. The fate of Earth depended on what happened next. And then the battle began. The Vanguard was now locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse with the Zorath fleet. The massive alien ships, each one a towering behemoth, loomed closer on the radar, their weapons primed and ready. On the bridge of the Vanguard, every member of the crew was tense, waiting for the first sign of movement that would signal the beginning of the battle. The weight of the situation pressed down on them all. One ship against a fleet. "Captain," Lieutenant Vega said, her voice steady but filled with urgency, "we're now within firing range. They've begun charging their weapons. We're almost out of time." Riker's gaze hardened. He knew this was it. They didn't have the luxury of waiting for backup. There was no one else coming to their aid. The decision to send only one ship had been made. And now, the crew of the Vanguard would face the consequences. "Prepare to engage," Riker ordered. "Give them everything we've got. But keep moving. They can't target what they can't hit." The Vanguard surged forward, engines roaring to life as it hurtled toward the massive Zorath fleet. Riker could feel the ship's vibrations beneath his feet as it accelerated, its weapon systems coming online one by one. The crew members moved quickly, their hands flying over their consoles as they readied themselves for the chaos that was about to unfold. In the observation deck, Lieutenant Carter was monitoring the Zorath's movements. His eyes scanned the rapidly changing data, his breath coming faster with every second. "They're locking on," Carter shouted, his voice tight with panic. "They've got us targeted. Shields are holding, but I don't know how long they'll last against that firepower." Riker turned his gaze to the vast, terrifying silhouette of the Zorath flagship that filled the view screen. It was enormous, its weapons bristling like the teeth of some nightmarish creature. The Vanguard was a fraction of the size, but Riker knew that size wasn't everything. Humanity had their own advantages: speed, ingenuity, and most importantly, they had the will to fight. "Hold tight," Riker barked. "This is just the beginning." Suddenly, the Zorath flagship fired. A beam of green energy shot across the void of space, streaking toward the Vanguard. The crew braced themselves for impact, but at the last moment, Vega jerked the ship hard to the right. The beam missed by mere inches, narrowly avoiding the Vanguard's hull. "Nice move, Vega," Riker exclaimed, his heart pounding in his chest. But there was no time for praise. The battle had only just begun, and the Zorath were relentless. "Fire," Riker commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos on the bridge. The Vanguard returned fire, its weapon systems firing off a series of powerful blasts. The energy projectiles shot toward the Zorath fleet, some of them connecting with smaller ships and tearing them apart. The explosion illuminated the dark void, a bright flash of destruction against the inky blackness of space. But the Zorath were not easily defeated. They retaliated with even more force, sending volley after volley of powerful beams toward the Vanguard. The ship's shields flared brightly, absorbing the impact with groaning metal. But each hit weakened them. Riker knew that it wouldn't be long before the shields failed completely. "Damage report," he barked. "Shields at 40% and dropping." Lieutenant Vega replied, her fingers flying over the controls. "We can't keep this up much longer." Riker's mind raced as the situation grew more dire. Their weapons were effective, but they couldn't outgun the Zorath fleet. They had no choice but to outmaneuver them. The Vanguard was faster, more agile, and Riker intended to use that to their advantage. "Pull up and roll left," Riker ordered. "Get us out of here now." Vega quickly followed the command, the Vanguard twisting and darting through space as the crew held on tight. The Zorath's shots missed, but the enemy's weapons were relentless, firing in every direction, forcing the Vanguard to dodge and weave like a snake in the dark. The battle was a deadly ballet, and every move could be the difference between life and death. But Riker was determined. He wouldn't let Earth fall to these invaders. Not today. "Target their engines," Riker shouted. "Take them out of the fight." The Vanguard's targeting systems locked onto the nearest Zorath ship, a massive destroyer that was hovering just behind the flagship. With a squeeze of his finger, Riker gave the order. The Vanguard's main cannon fired, a devastating shot that tore through the destroyer's engines. The ship erupted in a ball of fire, its hull collapsing under the force of the blast. It drifted lifelessly into the void, unable to continue the fight. "One down," Riker muttered. "Now keep going." But as soon as the destroyer fell, a dozen more Zorath ships closed in on the Vanguard. They weren't giving up. The odds were getting worse, but Riker refused to back down. Suddenly, Carter's voice rang out. "Captain, we've got something strange on the radar. Something big. It's emerging from the Zorath flagship." Riker narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean? What's coming?" Carter's voice trembled as he watched the readings on his console. "It's a massive ship. It's much larger than anything we've seen before. It's moving towards us. Fast." Riker's stomach dropped. "Brace for impact." The moment he spoke, the massive ship loomed into view on the screen, dwarfing everything in sight. Its weapon systems powered up, its guns turning toward the Vanguard with terrifying precision. The crew of the Vanguard held their breath, knowing that this was the most dangerous moment of their lives. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and now they were facing an even greater threat than before. But Riker wasn't about to give up, not when the stakes were this high. "All hands, "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," he ordered. "We'll show them what humanity is made of." With that, the Vanguard veered toward the massive Zoreth ship, ready to give everything it had in the fight for survival. The Vanguard had become a symbol of human resilience. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, despite the odds stacked against them, Captain Riker and his crew refused to surrender. With the colossal Zoreth flagship now closing in on them, every moment felt like a lifetime. The air was thick with tension, and the crew members knew that this would be the moment that decided the fate of humanity. "Captain," Lieutenant Vega's voice broke through the silence of the command deck. "The big ship is closing fast. We need to make a decision, now." Riker's mind raced. The Zoreth flagship was an absolute monster. Its weapons could decimate the Vanguard in a single strike, and they had no way to escape. The ship was too close for their usual evasive maneuvers to work effectively. "We can't outrun it, and we can't keep dodging forever," Riker muttered to himself, his knuckles white from gripping the chair. "We need to hit it before it hits us." "We've been firing everything we've got," Carter said, his voice tight with frustration. "The shields are still holding, but I don't know for how long." Riker's eyes darted to the screen. The Zoreth flagship was monstrous, its hull covered with thick, armored plating, and its weapon systems bristling with deadly energy. It was closing in on them with terrifying speed, and every second it approached felt like a countdown to certain death. "Damn it," Riker growled. "All right, listen up. We'll take the fight to them. Full speed ahead, right into the heart of their fleet." Vega's eyes widened. "Sir, that's insane. If we charge right into their fire, we'll be obliterated." Riker fixed his gaze on her, his expression unwavering. "That's our only shot. We can't run, and we can't wait for a miracle. If we're going down swinging. All hands, prepare for impact. This is going to be a fight they'll never forget." With a steely resolve, Riker gave the order. The Vanguard surged forward, its engines roaring as it cut through the cold expanse of space. The crew was tense, every second feeling like a step closer to death. But they didn't flinch. They didn't waver. "Firing all weapons on my mark," Riker said, his voice steady despite the madness unfolding around them. The Vanguard closed the distance, dodging fire from the Zoreth ships that continued to barrage them with waves of energy. The shields held strong, but the ship was taking damage, each hit making the crew's stomachs churn. Yet they pushed forward. "Ready? Now," Riker yelled. The Vanguard's weapon systems opened fire in unison. Massive energy blasts shot forward, streaking through the darkness of space toward the Zoreth flagship. The explosions illuminated the void, their shockwaves rippling through the space around them. The flagship's shields flared brightly as they absorbed the initial barrage, but Riker could see the damage was starting to take its toll. The massive ship staggered, its fire slowing for a brief moment as the Vanguard strikes tore into its hull. "Direct hit," Carter shouted, excitement in his voice. "The shields are weakening." Riker didn't have time to celebrate. The Zoreth flagship was still intact and still coming. The enemy fleet moved to intercept the Vanguard, but Riker knew that the real fight was just beginning. "They'll regroup fast," Riker said grimly. "We need to take down their command center. If we destroy their flagship, the rest of their fleet might fall apart. Focus all firepower on their command bridge." The crew quickly adjusted, aiming their remaining energy beams toward the vulnerable core of the Zoreth flagship. The Vanguard swerved, firing with precision and speed that was nearly impossible for the Zoreth to track. But the flagship retaliated with even more ferocity. The Vanguard rocked violently as a beam from the flagship connected with their shields. The power fluctuation sent sparks flying across the control panel. The ship groaned, and a deep shudder reverberated throughout its frame. "We're losing shields," Vega shouted, panic creeping into her voice. "If we don't do something." "Keep firing," Riker roared. "We're not backing down." The Vanguard's weapons fired again, hitting the Zoreth flagship's bridge. The alien ship's hull cracked and shuddered as the beams tore through its armor, sending debris floating into space. A large section of the bridge exploded in a flash of light, sending shockwaves throughout the ship. For a moment, the Zorath flagship seemed to falter, its movements slowing. Riker's heart raced. This was it. This could be the turning point they needed. But just as the crew allowed themselves a brief moment of hope, a new, terrifying threat appeared on the radar. "Captain, incoming," Carter yelled. "Another wave of Zorath ships. And this one's bigger. They're all coming for us." The Vanguard was now surrounded. Dozens of Zorath ships were closing in on all sides, each one bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than the last. Riker's face hardened. There was no more room to maneuver. There was no more time for tactics. This was it. It was now or never. "Lieutenant Vega," Riker said, his voice calm but resolute, "prepare the ship for a full assault. We're going to take down the Zorath fleet, one ship at a time. Let's show them the true power of humanity." With that, the Vanguard surged forward, locking onto the nearest Zorath ship and unleashing everything it had left. The battle was far from over, but Riker was ready to fight to the bitter end. The Vanguard was now caught in the middle of a hellish battlefield. Around them, the remnants of destroyed Zorath ships drifted in the cold expanse of space, but the situation had only become more dire. The Zorath fleet was regrouping, and their numbers were far too great for the Vanguard to take on alone. "We've taken out a few of their ships," Lieutenant Vega said, her voice laced with urgency. "But they're coming at us from every direction. We're running out of time, Captain." Riker's eyes were locked on the forward display, watching as more Zorath ships entered the fray. The Vanguard was an impressive vessel, but even its impressive firepower and shield systems couldn't withstand the overwhelming force of an entire fleet closing in. Every second they fought, the Zorath grew more determined, their attacks more brutal. "Captain," Carter shouted, panic creeping into his voice, "their flagship is back online. It's charging up its main weapon again. If it hits us—" "We won't let it hit us," Riker interrupted, his jaw set in grim determination. "Vega, I need you to launch every last missile we have left. We're going to blind them." Vega nodded, her hands flying across the controls as she prepped the final missiles. The Vanguard had been hit hard, and every system was running on fumes, but they still had one last chance to strike. Locking missiles on the Zorath flagship's weak points, Vega announced, targeting the lower hull where the energy conduits are exposed. "Do it," Riker barked. With a thunderous roar, a volley of missiles erupted from the Vanguard's tubes, cutting through the void toward the Zorath flagship. The missiles struck with deadly accuracy, tearing through the flagship's defenses and blasting through its hull. For a moment, it seemed like the flagship might fall. But then, the flagship's weapons powered up once again. The brilliant burst of energy erupted from its core, heading straight for the Vanguard. The Vanguard's shields flared with the impact, but they were weakening, and Riker knew they wouldn't hold much longer. "Shields at 20%, Carter yelled. "We can't take another hit like that. We need to end this now," Riker said, his voice cutting through the chaos. He turned to Vega. "Initiate evasive maneuvers. Prepare for the final strike." Vega's fingers hovered over the controls as the ship jerked, dodging another incoming shot from the Zorath flagship. Their movements were sharp and calculated, but time was running out. "Enemy ships closing fast," Carter warned. "We're surrounded. They've got us boxed in." Riker's mind raced. The Vanguard had no choice but to fight back harder. There was no escape now. "Open fire on the closest ship," Riker ordered, his voice cold and controlled despite the tension in the air. "We'll break through them." The Vanguard fired with everything it had left. Energy blasts, missiles, every available weapon. The ship surged forward, its weapons lighting up the dark expanse of space as they tore through enemy vessels. One by one, the Zorath ships were destroyed, but more kept coming. The Vanguard was slowing down, its systems failing as the strain of constant battle took its toll. Riker could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He looked to his crew, every one of them fighting for their lives, their eyes filled with the same determination that had carried them this far. "We're not giving up," Riker shouted to them. "We'll make it through this together." But even Riker's resolve couldn't change the fact that they were on the brink of collapse. The Vanguard was still being relentlessly attacked, its hull cracked and torn from the bombardment. And the Zorath flagship, it was still firing, still trying to end the fight. Then, just as it seemed like all hope was lost, a new message appeared on Riker's comm panel. "Captain," Vega said, her voice filled with disbelief, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. It's a fleet. Our fleet. The reinforcements are here." Riker's heart skipped a beat as he stared at the transmission. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Vanguard's crew allowed themselves a breath of relief. The transmission was brief, but the message was clear. Earth had mobilized its fleet of warships. Their reinforcements were already en route. A dozen human vessels appeared on the edge of the battlefield, coming to join the Vanguard in its fight against the Zorath. "They've arrived," Riker muttered, a grin tugging at the corner of his lips. "It's not over yet." The tide of the battle had shifted. The Zorath fleet, realizing that reinforcements had arrived, hesitated. Their flagship paused, as though considering its next move. But it was too late. The reinforcements opened fire, their weapons lighting up the dark expanse of space. The Zorath fleet was now in disarray. Their flagship, still struggling to stay intact, became the focal point of the human fleet's combined firepower. Every ship, from the Vanguard to the newly arrived reinforcements, concentrated their fire on the flagship. "We've got them on the ropes," Carter yelled, his voice full of excitement. The Vanguard's crew cheered as the Zorath flagship's defenses collapsed under the combined assault. Explosions rocked the alien ship, and the Vanguard felt the shockwaves of its destruction. It was a moment of triumph, a moment that humanity would never forget. Riker stood tall at the helm, watching as the last of the Zorath ships were destroyed. The battle had been long and brutal, but humanity had emerged victorious. The enemy had underestimated Earth's resilience, and they paid the ultimate price. As the dust settled, Riker turned to his crew, his face filled with pride. "Mission accomplished, everyone. We've done it," he said, his voice full of respect for the crew that had fought so hard. The Vanguard had survived against all odds, and humanity had shown the galaxy the true strength of their will. But the war was far from over. There would be more battles, more challenges ahead. But for now, humanity had won, and that was all that mattered. The Vanguard's crew had barely begun to process their victory when the unexpected happened. The Zorath, though shattered, were not finished. Their remaining forces regrouped with eerie precision, and a new wave of ships appeared from the darkness of space. They were smaller, faster, and more agile, designed for quick strikes and devastating ambushes. "Incoming," Carter shouted, his voice thick with urgency. "The Zorath aren't giving up yet." Riker's heart sank as he saw the new fleet on the radar. Their ships moved like shadows, darting in and out of view, taking advantage of the Vanguard's weakened state. Though their numbers were smaller, the Zorath were better organized now, and they were using guerrilla tactics to devastating effect. "Shields are still at 15%, Vega cried, her fingers dancing across the controls, trying to stabilize the Vanguard's weakening defenses. "We can't hold out much longer." The Vanguard's engines sputtered as it attempted to move into a better firing position. But the Zorath ships closed in, each one more aggressive than the last. The Vanguard systems groaned under the pressure, and the crew could feel the ship shudder with every impact from the enemy's weapons. "We need to think fast," Riker shouted, trying to keep the crew focused despite the overwhelming odds. "Vega, get those weapons online. Carter, brace for impact." The Zorath fired relentlessly, their energy weapons tearing into the Vanguard's hull. Sparks flew from the walls, and the ship jolted violently. Riker felt his stomach drop as the ship groaned under the pressure. They couldn't keep taking hits like this. "I've got an idea," Vega called out, her voice cracking with desperation, but laced with hope. "We can overload the weapons systems. If we redirect all the power to the front-facing cannons, we can punch through their formation." Riker's eyes widened. The plan was risky. One wrong move, and they could lose the Vanguard entirely. But they didn't have a choice. "Do it," he ordered. "We're going to push through this. Carter, get us as close as you can to that enemy formation." With a tense nod, Carter set the Vanguard on a dangerous course, heading straight toward the heart of the enemy fleet. The ship shook with every blast that hit them, but they pressed forward. They had to act fast before the Zoreth could regroup and strike back again. Targeting the Zoreth fleet's command ship, Vega said, her hands a blur on the console. "If we take that down, we can break their coordination." The Vanguard rocketed forward, its weapons glowing with overcharged energy. Riker's heart raced as the ship hurtled through the battlefield, dodging enemy fire while staying locked on their target. The tension in the air was palpable as they approached the command ship. "Firing in 3, 2, 1. Vega called, her finger poised above the final button. Just as the Zoreth command ship loomed in their sights, a massive blast rocked the Vanguard. The ship's shields flared, but they were now on the verge of collapse. Riker gripped the controls, eyes locked on the view screen, willing the ship to survive. "Now, Vega," Riker barked. Vega pressed the button, and the Vanguard's cannons unleashed a devastating barrage of energy blasts, streaking toward the Zoreth command ship. The blasts slammed into its hull with overwhelming force. The command ship's shields flickered and collapsed under the intensity of the assault. The Zoreth flagship exploded in a brilliant flash, its final moments marked by a violent rupture as debris scattered across space. For a moment, the crew of the Vanguard held their breath. Then, an overwhelming cheer broke out across the bridge. "We did it," Carter shouted, his face a mixture of relief and disbelief. Riker exhaled sharply, a grin spreading across his face. They had done it. The Zoreth flagship was destroyed, and with it, the heart of their coordination had crumbled. The remaining Zoreth ships faltered, confusion spreading through their ranks. But as the crew celebrated their victory, Riker knew they weren't out of the woods yet. The Vanguard was still battered and bruised. Its hull was leaking oxygen, and its systems were barely functioning. The ship was running on fumes. "Hold on, everyone," Riker said, his voice steady. "This isn't over yet. We still have a battle to finish." Outside, the remnants of the Zoreth fleet began to scatter. Without their command ship, they were disorganized, falling apart. But they weren't retreating. Not yet. "We've crippled their command," Vega said, her voice shaking slightly from the intensity of the battle. "But they still have some fight left in them. We need to finish this while we still can." The enemy ships, though wounded, were still moving with purpose, preparing to launch one final strike. The Vanguard was still one ship against a fleet, but Riker wasn't ready to give up, not when they were this close to victory. "Carter, Vega, prepare for the final push," Riker ordered, his voice full of resolve. "We're ending this today." As the final pieces of the Zoreth fleet regrouped for one last stand, the Vanguard prepared for what could be its final battle. But no matter what happened next, Riker knew one thing for sure: they would fight until the end. Earth had sent one ship to face the enemy, and that one ship was going to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. The battlefield was a mess of debris and wreckage, floating silently in the vastness of space. The Vanguard, battered but still operational, hovered above the shattered remnants of the Zoreth fleet. The crew could barely believe what had just happened. In a desperate gamble, they had turned the tide, but their victory came at a steep price. "Status report," Riker demanded, his voice steady but filled with fatigue. "Shields are down to 5%, Captain. Engines are at minimal power, and life support systems are barely functioning," Vega replied, her face pale as she worked furiously at the control panel. "But we're still alive." Riker nodded grimly. The Vanguard had taken an incredible amount of damage. Their systems were barely holding together. The ship's hull was peppered with scorch marks, and it seemed like the faintest of vibrations might tear it apart. "How much longer until we can jump to FTL?" he asked, though he feared the answer. Carter, who had been focused on keeping the ship on course, looked over with a troubled expression. "We're not going anywhere at this rate, Captain. The engine's overheating, and the FTL drive is offline. It'll take us days, maybe longer, to make it back home." Riker's eyes darkened. They were stranded in the middle of enemy territory, surrounded by the remnants of the Zorith fleet. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. They needed to get back to Earth, but without a working engine, it seemed impossible. And yet, they had accomplished something incredible. The Zorith had attacked Earth with the intent of wiping humanity out. Yet here they were, surviving, victorious. One ship against an entire fleet, and they had held their ground. "There's one more thing we need to do," Riker said, turning to his crew. His voice, though tired, held an unshakable determination. "We need to send a message to the galaxy, to everyone who thought humanity was weak." He turned to Vega. "Can you get our long-range communications back online?" Vega hesitated for a moment before nodding. "It'll take some work, but I think I can do it." "Good. We're going to broadcast to the galaxy. We're not just sending a distress signal, we're sending a warning." The crew fell silent as they realized what Riker was proposing. He wasn't just planning to send a message about their victory. He wanted the entire galaxy to know what humanity was capable of. Hours passed as Vega worked tirelessly to restore the communication systems. The ship was still in bad shape, but the crew was determined. They had faced impossible odds and come out on top, and they weren't about to let that be the end of their story. Finally, Vega turned to Riker. "It's ready. We're all set to broadcast." Riker took a deep breath, then stood tall, looking out at the broken remains of the Zorith fleet. His mind flashed to the destruction they had left in their wake. This was their moment. This was their declaration. "Send the message." The broadcast went live, its signal rippling out across the galaxy. On the screen, Riker's face appeared, his eyes full of resolve. "This is Captain Riker of the Vanguard. To the galaxy, to every race that has ever doubted humanity. We are not just survivors. We are warriors. We are not weak. We are not powerless. And we will not stand by while anyone tries to crush us." His voice was steady, strong. The words echoed through the speakers, each syllable carrying the weight of their struggle. The Zorith came to Earth to conquer. They came to destroy us. They thought one ship could not stand against their fleet. They were wrong. Earth is not a planet to be ignored. Earth is a force to be reckoned with. We, humanity, are a force to be reckoned with. Riker paused for a moment, as if letting the weight of his words settle. Then he continued, his voice unwavering. "The Vanguard may have been the only ship sent, but the galaxy will learn this lesson. We do not fight alone. We fight together, and no enemy will stand in our way." With that, the broadcast ended. The message had been sent. The crew stood in silence, letting the weight of their victory wash over them. They had faced the impossible and come out victorious. And now, the galaxy would know what humanity was capable of. For a moment, there was only the sound of the ship's battered systems hums, a quiet reminder of their near defeat and their incredible survival. Then, Carter turned to Riker. "Captain, the Zorith fleet is disbanding. They're retreating. It's over." Riker's shoulders relaxed. The battle had been long, and it had taken everything they had. But they had won. And in doing so, they had proven that humanity was not to be underestimated. "We did it," Vega whispered, her voice a mix of awe and relief. Riker turned to face her, a proud smile forming on his lips. "Yes, we did. And now the galaxy knows what happens when you underestimate humanity. The Vanguard remained adrift in space, a testament to their victory. But it wasn't just the ship that had triumphed. It was humanity itself. And as Riker and his crew prepared to face whatever challenges awaited them next, one thing was clear. Humanity had just shown the galaxy that they were a force to be reckoned with.